we're starting Siman Kuf Tesvav, the halachas of Chol Yisrael and Venus Yisrael. The Siman has only 3 halachas to it, but they're 3 very, very long halachas. The halacha of Chol Yisrael goes on for more than 2 pages here in my Shulchan Aruch. We're going to break it down into a bunch of different parts and make our way through it. And then the last 2 sifrim are about Venus Yisrael, and the last one in particular is about Chema. Okay, we'll talk about that as we get to it. Let's start off. We'll do a little chunk of the Shulchan Aruch today and see where it takes us. Cholav, if you're curious, it's on the screen. If anybody look at it, Cholav shechol v'arik kachavim. If milk that the cow had been milked by someone who was not Jewish, ve'en yisrael ra'ehu, and there's no yid watching while they're milking the cow, also you're not allowed to drink that milk. Shem ir b'chol tamei, because we're concerned that the guy may have mixed in non-kosher milk into it. Okay, so what the Shulchan Aruch is repeating is what the Gemara says. The reason why Chol Achim is Aser is because of these 2 reasons. Because of this reason that they might have mixed in non-kosher milk. So, in the Gemara is talking about this Gzera, the Gemara is trying to understand why did they make this Gzera. That's the Gemara's discussion. And the Gemara mentions 2 properties of kosher milk. The Gemara contrasts kosher milk and treif milk. The Gemara is saying this as in, why do we need to make the Gemara? Lamed Hayim Beis in Avodah Zarah. The Gemara says, why would we need to make a Gzera when there are these 2 properties that are different between kosher milk and non-kosher milk, so everyone could tell if it's kosher milk or non-kosher milk. That's the Gemara's question from these 2 properties. Okay, and the 2 properties are, the first is that kosher milk is white, as opposed to non-kosher milk, which the Gemara says is yarok. Okay, in this case, yarok means yellow. Okay, it has a creamy yellow color to it. And the second is that kosher milk can coagulate into cheese, and non-kosher milk cannot. Okay, so the Gemara asks these 2 questions. 2 questions. Why would they make a gzera that you can't eat treif milk? That you can't eat milk without Yisrael watching it when the milk, these 2 properties, everyone could tell in a second which milk is kosher and which one is not. That's the Gemara's question. And we're going to talk about those 2 properties that the Gemara described. We're going to do the second one first. Okay, the second one, which is much more famous, which is that kosher milk can turn into cheese, and non-kosher milk cannot.
Therefore, you can test it to see.
Therefore, you could test it. That was the Gemara's question. Go test it. What's the problem? You can easily tell whether it's kosher or not. In other words, why would they make an example? So there's 2 parts within this part of that it becoming non-kosher cheese. One is the fact that only kosher milk can become cheese. Maybe will prove to us that if a guy milked a cow, bedafka to make cheese, maybe that should prove to us that he wouldn't be so foolish as to mix in treif milk because he knows he's making cheese out of it. If he's going to make cheese out of it, well, no, not mixing. It doesn't make any sense to him. If he was planning on making cheese out of it, he wouldn't be so foolish. It would be like putting apple juice in. Putting it in, it's not going to turn into cheese. If he was planning on making cheese, if he was going to make cheese out of it, he wouldn't have mixed in other milk. That's what we talk about in halacha base. It's in halacha base. It's in halacha base, this question about whether that can prove to us that he for sure used kosher milk. Okay, that's halacha base. But what's the get to our halacha is, the place can talk about Lamaisa. There are ways, or there appear to be ways. I don't want to say there are ways. There appear to be ways to make milk, to make cheese out of camel milk. So how could the Gemara say that you can't make that kosher, that treif cheese can't turn in? Treif milk can't turn into cheese when there appear to be ways that you can turn treif milk into cheese. Treif milk into cheese. Okay, so the person can take 3 different answers to that question.
So they're saying that science-wise the Gemara is wrong?
But that's the question. That's what that question is. The Gemara says it can't make into cheese. They're saying, well, people came to us and they said that they had cheese made out of camel milk.
Different type of cheese.
So the person have 3 answers to that question. Okay. The Pri Tayar, who's in this simon, talks about it. He says like this. He says in his time, people were mixing camel milk with kosher milk, and together with those together were making a cheese out of it. That's what he saw. So he said when the Gemara said that you can't make cheese out of treif milk, it meant treif milk by itself. But if you have treif milk mixed together with kosher milk, then you could make cheese out of it. Okay, and in fact, you're going to hear from this person again. There's a person named Rabbi Zohar Amar. David?
Yeah.
Can you put on mute on your phone?
Okay, okay.
Okay, so Rabbi Zohar Amar is a from man. He lives there to so. David?
Put yourself on mute.
Okay, so Rabbi Zohar Amar is a from person living there. So he reads scholarly papers on halachic topics on quite a variety of items. And I spoke to him really about the second part of this year. But he showed me some of the things that he wrote about it, and I've read some of the things he wrote about what we're going to talk about. He actually talks about that in older times. People used to do this, of mixing camel milk with kosher milk, and he has all kinds of graphs and charts of him testing it and seeing how it works and all kinds of things.
Is it after camel milk or any other?
Yes, camel milk.
Lives in Israel?
Yeah. So he says. So the Pretorius says when the Gemara said you can't make treif cheese out of milk, you can't make cheese out of treif milk. It only meant if you use the milk, it's straight. Okay. The Pretorius says, well, that sounds like it is. It makes no sense. He says, well, and I just tell you, it doesn't make any sense what I told you. He says, what's the Gemara talking about? In other words, you can eat milk because you can know, but I didn't eat it in treif milk. Because if you would have eaten it in the treif milk, it wouldn't turn into cheese. So the Gemara is talking about when you mix them together. He says, I just told you, when the Gemara only means separate, it doesn't mean when you mix together. He says, that doesn't make any sense. He has a question himself. He says, what are you talking about? The Gemara is talking about when you mix them together. So he says that in the times of the Gemara, there was no such, if I'll use the word, technology to make cheese, even if you mix them together. That chachma, how to do it, even if you mix them together, didn't exist in times of the Gemara. So when the Gemara said, if you eat cow milk, it won't turn into cheese. The Gemara was saying Lamaisha, you can't get cheese out of it because in their days you couldn't get cheese out of it, and therefore, the fact that you can make cheese, the people nowadays can make cheese out of it, they're mixed together, is not
Doesn't make sense.
Not ethical.
what?
Doesn't make sense.
But doesn't make
Gemara
sense.
says you
So what does
can't.
it say? Shama ira b'yikol tamei.
Fact that-
Why would he? But why would he?
That's the most question. No.
No, why?
But why was ours?
In the time of the Gemara, they didn't have the technology.
No, to make cheese out of it. In our din is you can't drink the milk straight because you might have mixed in the trace milk into it. The Gemara had a question, maybe make a test out of it by mixing that. So he says, no, the Gemara, in the Gemara times of the Gemara, there was no way to make it out of it. Yes.
I don't want to sound like if a Gemara says that you can't do it, I don't care what times of the generation you ask, you can't do it.
So the question is like this. So what he's saying is, no, Yanti, what he's saying is like this. The Gemara is not telling us, when the Gemara says you can't make cheese out of milk, the Gemara is not saying, it appears, he's saying it. The Gemara is not saying, somebody have to kabbalah from Moshe Rabbeinu. The Gemara is saying is, you want to tell me that we should make a gzera because people might do it. Nobody would do it because you could easily test it. Because where they were holding it, you could easily test it. The Gemara didn't say that we have to kabbalah from Moshe Rabbeinu. It's should we make a gzera d'Rabbanan? No, we don't make a gzera d'Rabbanan because it doesn't work.
Okay. I don't.
Okay, then you could because it's going to get even worse later. Okay.
I don't know if that goes on.
Okay.
About because if Chazal say you can't,
We had a
do
share
it,
of
no,
that
you
already.
can't do it.
Because they're talking about when you're making a gzera. When the Chachamim had made a gzera, in this case, there's no reason to make a gzera because you could test it. They were talking about a practical thing. We have a way to test it. We'll test it by hand, but we're testing the way that works for us.
Zera is from Olam Voy.
No. The question, why did they waste their time making a gzera if you could easily test it? So he said, the question, should they have made a gzera in the first place? So Gemara says, it would make no sense to make a gzera because you could easily test it. Not that they made the gzera, then why would they make the gzera in the first place?
Does the Gemara also use the lashon of Shema Irev though?
Yeah.
So I'm saying, so Shema Irev doesn't, by definition, it means you're a combination, Irev, a combination
Right.
of kosher and non-kosher
Yeah.
milk. So how does the Torah say that, based on the Gemara, we're talking about that, it was talking a straight non-kosher, it doesn't lashon Shema
Good.
Irev.
So that was his question on himself, to which he said, in the times of the Gemara, even mixed together also didn't work. Even if you mix them together, they couldn't make cheese out of it.
Oh, Shema Irev.
Right. So even wouldn't have
been the case.
Okay, next.
$1,000 on line one.
Hello?
On speaker.
Okay, if you can just put yourself mute, it was getting noisy from your background. Okay. Yeah, you missed an outburst over here. Okay. Next, the second teretz is, yeah, the Ritva says, that's why you hung up. The Ritva says, right there on the top also, he says, when the Gemara says that you can't make cheese out of non-kosher milk, he said, doesn't mean you can't make cheese out of it. He says, I don't know what his words, that you see people could do it. He says, the Gemara doesn't mean that. The Gemara means that when you make cheese out of non-kosher milk, most of the milk stays in the way, and I'm a little interpreting it, and it creates a cheese that's very schwach. There's very little of the solids turned into a cheese, so that kind of a cheese is not the same cheese that we're used to. So again, you could test it by looking at it, and you would see this stuff is not going to turn into real cheese. When the Gemara said it can't turn into cheese, it didn't mean it can't turn into anything. It can't turn into real cheese. Okay? And along those lines, the third answer the Ravad says, he says, when the Gemara said you can't make cheese out of it, the Gemara meant you can't make hard cheese. The Gemara did not mean that the Ravad is talking about yogurt or sour cream.
Cream cheese.
He uses the word yogurt. I don't know if he means yogurt or sour cream. The same idea, which is, if just before, this is going to really be negated later, but yogurts and soft cheeses are different than hard cheeses. That most soft cheeses, the whole milk turns into the new thing. Yogurt, when you make yogurt, you take milk and you do what you have to do to it. You add cultures to it, and it turns into yogurt. Okay, all the milk turns into yogurt, as opposed to a hard cheese. When you make a hard cheese, the one part of it solidifies, the curd solidifies, leaving behind the whey. Okay, so when you're making a soft cheese, he says soft cheese. What does it mean? When the Gemara says you can't make cheese out of it, the Gemara says you can't make cheese out of it. You can't make a hard cheese out of it. But a soft cheese you could make. This Ravad is going to come up again in Halacha Beis and Halacha Gimel when we talk about whether the Gzeira of Gvinas Akum applies to soft cheese.
Right.
Okay, so this sheet is going to be negated.
First time the Gemara when it says you can't make vina out of it, right? It means any cheese, no? But
Well, that's a question for Halacha Beis and Gimel. Whether when the word says cheese, does the word cheese mean hard cheese or does it mean any cheese?
Okay.
Are we maybe just stretching that word cheese to include yogurt? Maybe yogurt is not really cheese. That's going to be for Halacha Beis and Gimel. Yeah, okay, fine. So those are three answers. Three answers as to why what the Gemara said you can't make cheese is. We see people making different kinds of cheeses, and three answers from the person as to why it might be true. Okay. So now, just for some, if it'll help you, I'm just going to digress for a second, just because we have too much to do. I spoke to a person. See, is that on the next slide? Yeah. I spoke to a person named Dr. Ruven Yagil. Okay, he also is an Eretz Yisrael. He is not religious. And he's a world expert on camel milk. Okay, this person has been researching camel milk forever. He runs a website now. He's like a retired professor at this point, called like Camel Milk Magic, I believe it's called. And he promotes camel milk. Any research paper that I've read about camel milk is always quoting this person. He's a big expert. Okay, and he says that he's. Okay, what he said was, he said you can't make real cheese out of camel milk. He says as much as people have tried and they think that they did it and they say that they did it, he says it's not really true. Okay, so what we saw in these poskim about whether it is, he says it's not true. He says it has to do with the way you make cheese is that the casein, which is the main protein, or one of the main proteins in the cheese, turns into a cheese. He says the casein, and I don't know what the next word means. In particular, about kappa casein. There are 4 kinds of casein. The kappa casein is not right, and therefore it doesn't turn into cheese. Doesn't curdle. Good word. And Zohar Amar, in his Hebrew article, the one that I talked to you about before, and he says that he thinks the curdling has some connection to the stomachs of the cow. How many stomachs they have, and regular kosher animals who have all these stomachs, somehow that makes their milk be able to curdle. And camels, the reason why camels are so close, why camels, some people do it, it sort of works, because camels have 3 stomachs, not 4 stomachs. They have a similar stomach structure, but not exactly. And then in his English article, here's an article he wrote in English, he traces for you the DNA reason as to a common DNA that all kosher animals have, and he tries to explain how that relates into their milk being able to coagulate. Okay? And let's go on. So now we move on. So that was the second thing of the Gemara. We'll get back to this maybe at the end. The second thing the Gemara said as to why the difference between kosher milk and treif milk is that kosher milk can turn into cheese and treif milk can't. Okay. The Gemara's first thing.
But does that only apply to camel? What about other non-kosher animals?
Does what? Can you turn it into cheese?
Yeah. If you still got camels, I don't know if other animals like a pig, right? So how many stomachs does a pig have?
The answer is you want to know whether it can turn into cheese or whether this
right. I mean, you're talking about camel milk can't do it. What if there's other behemoths that
good question. The most research goes into camel milk. because, as we'll see when we get on, of the milks that are made in the world, there are 5 animals from which primarily milk is taken from. Camel is the only trace one.
You get donkey milk in Europe.
What did you say?
That's not advertising. You get donkey milk in Europe.
Yes, you can.
You can get mule.
You can get horse milk, and you can cat milk. I didn't say you can't. I didn't say you can't get other kinds of milk, but those are the 5 main ones. Camel, and camel particularly does a lot of research because camels live well during drought times, and camels are very common in the most poor parts of the world. So if those people would have a way to, instead of their milk spoiling, they had a way to preserve the milk and turn it into a cheese type of a thing, that would be most useful. So a lot of work has gone to try to help these people by teaching them, by figuring out how to make cheese out of it. They make like a whiskey, an alcoholic beverage out of camel milk. You should also, in case any of you were dying for that. It's not on our.
I read that.
It's not on our liquor list.
Middle East. No?
Maybe it should be, but anyway. Okay. Sorry, kids made a camel milk. Yeah. Anyway, okay. So now let's go to the first thing the Gemara said. The Gemara said was, I should have put this up also. The Gemara said was that that kosher milk is white, and treif milk is yoroi, which we translate as yellow, creamy. You're probably better off than I do.
No.
Yeah. That's right. Okay, so just for is as we move into this, a professor from UC Davis, who I spoke to, said, and other places said the same thing, which is the reason why milk is white. What the white part of the milk, the casein is the so to speak white part of the milk. The fat that's in the milk. I take that back. When animals eat carotenoids, I hope I pronounced that correctly, depending on how their stomachs digest it, those carotenoids may or may not be fully digested. If they pass through into the body, they find their way into fat and milk and egg yolk, okay, and that's what gives the color to those items. So milk fat is yellowish, and that's why when you make cheese, which has more fat in it, it has more of a yellow color to it. But in the milk itself, the fat is dispersed, and you don't see the yellow color it has to it because it's dispersed and covered, so to speak, by the casein, overshadowed by the casein. Okay, so what decides on the colors has a lot to do with how these carotenoids, I don't know if I pronounced it right, get digested in the stomach. Okay, all of this science I did not get, but anyhow, okay. So what the Gemara says about kosher milk being white and treif milk being yellowish is we can corroborate that. If you look at cow, buffalo, goats, and sheep, if you want all the marmacums I can give you, those are kosher animals, and they have white milk. When I say the word buffalo, I don't mean American buffalo. I'm talking about buffalo, Indian buffalo, water buffalo. But the Shulchan Aruch says it's a kosher animal. Shulchan Aruch brings that there's an animal called the buffalo that's kosher. He meant the Indian buffalo. And that's one of the animals from which a lot of milk is taken from worldwide. Not in the United States, but worldwide, it's a big supplier of milk, and it's kosher, and it's white. And on the other hand, horse milk and cat milk, which are used in little bits here and there, particularly in the East. Cat milk. Horse milk is used in the East a little bit. It's not even on this list from the FEO of the 5 hot milks, but it is used a certain amount. And cat milk is used a little bit. Cat milk was like a fad to use cat milk. But anyhow, they're both yellow. Okay. But we have 2 questions on the Gemara. 2 questions on the Gemara. One much more serious than the other. And the question is, how could the Gemara say that treif milk is yellow, okay, when in fact camel milk, okay, is as white as could be. Camel milk is, let's see if I can show you what my mouse is. Camel milk is white as snow. Okay, so how can the Gemara say that it's not? Here's a short, oops, I went to the next slide, I'm sorry.
I know why, because it changed.
There we go.
It changed.
There's just a clip from something.
It's a shirt.
There's 2 guys milking both sides of the camel. Camels have 4 udders, and there's 2 sides of the camel. And as you can see, it is white and foamy. Yes, that's great.
If you ever do real milk too, it is foamy a bit.
No, but camels is particularly
Cow milk is also foamy.
Particularly foamy. And here's a picture of it. Okay, that it's white as anything. Okay, here's some quotes from our friends to tell you that it's as white as anything. Okay, that it's as white as anything. So how could the Gemara tell us that treif milk is always yellow when camel camel milk is white as snow. Okay, look at this stuff. Look at how white this stuff is. Now, at first I thought for a second, I said, well, maybe they didn't use camel milk. Okay, so maybe camel milk, the Gemara was talking about what was around, and they didn't use camel milk. Okay, the problem with that is two problems. First of all, the Gemara Bukhari says, the Gemara Bukhari wants to know, why does it repeat the animals, the treif animals, in Parsha Shmini, and then again in Devarim? Why does it repeat all the animals? So the Gemara says, the reason why it repeats the word gomel is to teach us that the milk of a gomel is also treif. Okay, the word gomel is repeated in the Torah just to tell you that gomel milk is treif. So, of all the treif animals to mention, to say that the gomel is to teach that gomel milk is treif, sure implies that gomel milk was something that was around a little bit. Okay, you don't have to agree to that, right? But it sure sounds like that. If that's the Torah's example of what treif milk is gomel. It's a gomel or ha-gomel, two sheets in the Gemara, teaches us that gomel milk is treif.
What's ha-gomel?
The question is that you make the drasha because it says gomel twice. So the gomel is going to word the hay at the beginning. The second is that there are two poskim, there's really more, who took an attachment and a hartzvi, who say they hold the whole gzeira of Chazal of Chol Ba'akum was only because of milk from a gomel. Okay? Now what they saying is negated to something that we'll talk about later, which is what happens if, not today, but in a future time, is what happens if there's no reason for the gzeira of Chazal. Okay, what happens if, which is what they're talking about, if there's no gomels around and there's no chash at all, do you have to be choishes for chol v'akim? That's what they're talking about. But their starting point is that Chazal made their isser for milk of a gomel. Now, you can agree or not agree with what they're saying, but in their mind, that was the simple thing, is that the isser is because you might mix in gomel milk. Okay, in fact, you've asked about pig milk. Nobody milks pigs. Pigs have very little milk, and pigs they etzem have very little milk. And they're very hard to milk physically. They're very hard to milk, so people don't use pig milk. Okay, so the chash really is what we're seeing. The chash is gomel milk. So again, back to our question: how could the Gemara say that all milk, treif milk, is yellow when the milk, so to speak, the primary milk that they're talking about is gomel milk? That's what they're talking about. We're talking about gomel milk. That's white as anything. Okay, it's not. There's no yellowness at all. Actually, people will tell you that cow milk has a certain yellow color to it, but that very much depends on, according to UC Davis Press, what they
depends on the speed.
Depends on the speed. You're right. I'm sorry. I shouldn't start with you. Yeah, sure. It's actually it's the color in the grass that passes through as the carton noise. Very good, Yanni. Okay, thank you.
You're talking about milk expert.
Okay, so a second question is.
Milk.
The second question is not as strong as the first, but the second question is the Gemara. There's two parts of this rule. Treif milk is always yellow. Okay, the other half of that question, the other half of that rule was, and kosher milk is always white. Okay, well, there was going to be a video here, but it was a mistake. Okay, but the Yampa Valley Yak Farm in Colorado says that yaks are kosher. Okay?
We had one at our.
Yes, yaks are kosher, and they say that yak milk is
Yellow.
Creamy yellow. Okay, so how could the Gemara say that kosher milk is always white when we have yak milk, which is from a kosher animal, and that's creamy yellow? Okay, so
where are yaks located?
In Tibet, okay, in Mongolia, in way up high in the mountains.
So they didn't see it.
So the answer to this second question, I told you this. The answer to the second question is going to help us.
What about the birds that grew from the tree?
Yeah,
we'll talk about birds.
Right. The answer to the second question is going to hopefully help us answer the first question. And the answer to the second question is like this. The Gemara is not talking about theoretical, what is the truth, what color is milk and this. What is that talking about? The Gemara is not, when the Gemara says that kosher animals have certain features about their mouths, the Gemara says, if you want to, you could recognize the kosher animal by those features. Okay, by those features. When the Gemara says that rule has to be for all cases. You can't say I went to South America and found another cow, another animal. The Gemara says you go any place. But the Gemara didn't say that when it made this rule. These rules about the color, what we're talking about the color, was not said as go out hunting and look for colors and decide what's a kosher animal. The Gemara said is, why would Chazal have made an isser? Why did they bother making an isser? Everyone could tell the difference. That means that they looked around, they saw all the milk that was around it, and it was obvious which was the kosher, which was the treif. So they didn't have any yaks. There weren't any yaks in Bubble. Okay. So they were. It could be.
No yidden in Tibet.
Right. There's no yidden.
How do you know?
It's not in the.
I don't know.
You know what? Chazal, that I can't argue. I can't argue. You can't say Chazal.
So whether Chazal, what we're saying, the point is whether Chazal knew what color is not important. They're saying is in Lamaisa, why would anybody make a gzera that you can't eat milk unless you know whether there was other thing mixed into it? Everyone can tell the difference. Could it be that if you go to Tibet that wouldn't work? So the Chachmei Tibet will make a gzera that you can't eat milk because Chachmei Tibet will have that problem. But we don't live in Tibet. If we live in Bobo. You're living in Bobo. There's no reason to make such a gzera. Well, Chachmei Eretz Yisrael. It's from the Mishnah. It's also in Eretz Yisrael. There was no gzera. There's no yaks in Eretz Yisrael. So why would anybody make a gzera? So the Gemara is asking a question that's saying big in the Metzias. What point did they make a gzera? It's not to say whether they didn't know it. It's not important whether they didn't know that. The point that Chazal wouldn't make a gzera. Now, I didn't get there. I'm answering yaks first. That's yaks so far. Okay. So now that's the easier one to answer. Is the yak is less of a question. For camels, it's harder to say. Okay, we can't say what I just said. It's ridiculous. There are camels all over the place. So the question is, can we take what we said one step further and say? And now we have to conjecture. Okay, but right now, today, camel milk is much, maybe like 10 times more expensive than cow's milk. Okay, I don't know what it was then, but today camel milk is way more expensive than cow milk. So could it be that when Chazal said with Kosher that someone mixed in milk into the treif milk they didn't mean is you could mix in any treif milk. They were saying, let's think about it. What would somebody mix into this thing? So horse milk you'd mix in, because horse milk is worthless. No one's going to horse milk. So the guy has some extra horse milk, he'll throw it into the milk to throw it in. But why, maybe they were saying was that there's no reason to concern yourself that someone mixing camel milk, because only Meshuggah would mix in camel milk. Wait, in other words, this is a general rule.
How do you know it was more expensive than those?
So I don't know. I know it is today.
I mean, is there any...
I don't know. So what I'm saying is like this. Just like we have a rule that when we choishish, we have to have simanim on things, and we're choishish that people might switch things. We're only choishish for things that people might do that's logical to them. That might make sense. We don't think they do it lahachas. So maybe when we said that the chashas maybe they mix in other milk, we're only being concerned that they mix in milks that are within reason, and all of those milks were yellow. Okay, now that's much more of a stretch than the eggs, because
what does that help with camel?
So for cat, if we say there was no chashash that anybody would mix in camel milk, the whole chashash is that somebody would mix in donkey milk and cat milk and all kinds of other things. So for that, the Gemara has a good rule. All those kind of milks are all yellow. Camel milk, but no Meshuggah would stick in camel milk into the cow's milk. There would be no point there.
The two reasons before you quoted the Hertz, good.
So the two weaknesses is what I said is that one is the Tashbitz and the Hertz said that the Gemara's Chazal's Takon was only for camel. That's not like I'm saying. That's for sure. The second is correct. The second is that the Gemara, the way we're saying, the Gemara really needed a few more words. The Gemara should have said this: if your Chosher that they stuck in treif milk, any treif milk they would stick in would be yellow. The Gemara missed a few words over there. So a Rishon would answer. A Rishon could say is the Gemara meant that. Like the Ritva said, the Gemara only meant like this. We could have stuck in those words. It's a little unusual that it should take 1,500 years for someone to realize that we're missing a few words, right? So it's a little bit something that would be missing from what the Gemara said. But I have to tell you, so I'm not at all convinced this is the right answer. And the question, but it's really better than the answer. Okay? The question is, look at the picture. We got white milk. We got camel milk. So the question is better than the answer. My answer I'm giving you is not a great answer, but that's all I found. I don't know anything any better. I'm happy to hear an answer. But the question, look at the question. That's the treif milk that they looked at. Camel milk is white. What am I supposed to tell you? The Gemara said that all treif milk is yellow, and there it is. We're staring us in the face.
Are the two reasons independent? The yellow
yes.
and the cheese?
Yes, they're independent. Yes. That's what Tashbitz and Hartzi are talking about. Yeah, that's what they're talking about.
Here in America.
The Hartzi said, well, we're deeming this America that there's no count. That's what he's talking about. Yeah.
You have to ask Rabbi Amar about the color.
What did you say?
Did you ever ask Rabbi Amar about the color?
Which about the color of the animal?
Yeah.
No, I asked other people about that. Oh no, did I ask him why the color's wrong?
I mean, Rabbi, that the color of the camel milk doesn't...
Of course I did. I did ask him. I asked him and a number of other people, some of whom we can't mention on the phone here, live. They didn't have an answer. No, I couldn't find anybody with an answer. I asked him, I said, what do you think about this? Dr. Amar, Rabbi Zohar Amar, you have lots and lots of all kinds of things. So I asked him, I said, tell me what it is. I didn't get a good answer.
How does he make a living from this?
He's a professor.
Yeah,
Okay.
You imagine spending your life
and I have to tell you something. What I'm trying to say, I'm not trying to say to you Now, I'm not trying to say to you that nowadays there shouldn't be an issue of chol of akum because nobody would mix in camel milk. That's not what I'm trying to say. That's a shayla we're going to talk about. What happens if there is no real chashash? Would it be usher or not? I'm not trying to say that. But what I'm trying to say is, when the Gemara's question is, why did anybody make such a gzeira? So in that point, it's definitely right to ask. If camel milk, no one would put it for financial reasons. And other milk, you'd be able to tell. The one has a good question, why did anybody do it? I'm not trying to say, and therefore we shouldn't have it that kind. That's a shayla. We're going to talk about the person.
Is camel milk whiter than cow's milk?
According to
this picture, it is.
According to
You've ever been to a farm and watched them milk cows?
According to the Camel Milk Association, it's even whiter than cow
Can
milk.
you tell the difference based on the fact that it's whiter?
Well, now you're getting this is a little touchy. The Gemara said, this is white and this is yellow. It says it's even
Don't
whiter.
go the other way.
Well, just ask one kasha, and you needs to be kind of different animals. The point being that it's a different color. So it says yellow, because, most of them are yellow.
So you mean the one that's color white? Okay, that's a little pushing it. I forgot to tell you.
After the animal?
No. I've got to tell you that the Shach says, the Shach in Kufir Ches, which is really for next time, says, when he says over the Gemara, instead of the word yoroi, he says the word achar, ayin, char, resh, which is opaque. Okay? The people who I spoke to said that camel milk and cow's milk are similarly opaque. Okay, I don't know if he's giving a hezbollah of the Gemara or he had a different gears in the Gemara. He uses that word, and the Jewish uses the same word also. Maybe that has something to do with it. No one who I spoke to could tell me a difference in the opacity of these different milks. The impression was that they're the same. Okay. Now, the truth is that what I'm telling you, what I'm trying to say to you about, I'm almost done. What I'm trying to say to you is, no, he wants to. What I'm trying to say to you is really along the lines of the pre-tire. Okay, that's what he's leaving. What I'm trying to say to you is along the lines of the pre-tire. The pre-tire said, the reason the Gemara said that treif milk can't coagulate, the Gemara was talking with what they were facing. With the technology in their time, there was no way to coagulate treif milk, and therefore they said, let's not make it zero. There would be no reason for it. And we're saying along the same lines, along the lines of the pre-tire, that it could be that there are milks that are other colors, but what faced the real chashash didn't face them, that's why they would have made it zero. Okay, one last thing to say is, Rabbi Yaakov Emden has a sefer called, I never heard of this before, called Biras Migdal Ois. Okay, he has a sefer, that's such a sefer. And way towards the end of the sefer, I saw this in Rabbi Amar, one of the, in the Hebrew article, I think. He says like this. He said, he brings down the Gemara's, how do you know whether an animal's kosher? He brings down the rules of the Gemara earlier he had brought down the rules of the Gemara that you can tell if an animal's kosher by looking at its teeth marks and different things like that. And then he brings these two things in the Gemara, these two simanim from the Gemara, that say you could tell an animal's kosher because the kosher milk coagulates and it has a white color. And at first he's very confident, he feels very confident using that as a weighted sign an animal's kosher. In other words, he doesn't use it exactly, but he says if you go out to Tibet and you find a cow, you find an animal that you never saw before, and you don't know if it has split hooves and this and that, but you take the milk out and it comes out white, you can eat it. The animal's kosher. Or you take out the milk and you turn it to cheese, he says you can eat it. He at first thinks like donkey thought, which is that looking at the Gemara's rules of those two rules are Kabbalahs from Chazal. You can use them to determine if the animal is kosher also. At the end, he just hesitates a little bit because he says maybe this thing about color is something we're not so careful about. As time goes on, we don't know these things so well. Like we don't know Maris Nagoyim, we don't know Maris Avenida, we don't know these colors so well. So maybe we don't know the colors so well, and maybe we shouldn't use it as a sin. But the Etzem, he took the Gemara at face value, which was to say when the Gemara made a rule that it can't coagulate and it has a white color, the Gemara meant it at face value that it's a real rule. But again, we've seen some questions of both of those rules.